So we've exported our 3D model from GravitySketch, which gave us a zip file. We unzip that folder, and then we import the OBJ in your 3D modeling software. For me, it's 3D Max, and I'm gonna show you, do a quick run through of how I prepare the models before I open them in Substance Painter. Let me get rid of the grid and show my wireframe and bring up the material editor. It's exported the materials we created in GravitySketch, which gives you 12 different materials. If we were to import this directly into Unity, it would give us 12 draw calls, which would be very inefficient. This is not what we want. I'm going to create a generic material. Let's call it Flora Tutorial for now. And let's make it pink. And now it all has the same material. Now what I want to do is give it about the right scale. And for this, it's important that your unit setup in 3ds Max is set to centimeters. I usually have the display unit scale set to centimeters and the system unit setup set to that as well. Let's give this measurement tool a height of 170, which would be about average person height. And then I want to scale this up to where I feel it's about right. Something like this. This is not a huge tree. Most importantly, because we can always scale it later on in Unity, more importantly is the scale that these objects have with regard to each other. Because the smaller they are now, the harder it will be to scale them up a lot later on, because of course then the texture resolution will suffer. But I think the individual scale is good like this. Now it's all one object, and the reason for that is because there's this thing that I do when I'm UVW unwrapping in 3ds Max that crashes if these are separate objects that share the UV map. So we're going to go through the whole unwrapping part, and then at the end we're going to detach these objects. But that's just something that might be fixed in the newer version of 3ds Max. But for now, I know I have to do it like this. So now we know that the scale is about right. I go into Edit Poly mode, select vertices, Control A to select them all. And I just want to make sure that even though Weld Vertices was on when we exported it from GravitySketch, I just want to make sure that it didn't miss anything. And let me put this threshold very small, 1/10 of a millimeter in fact, and it shows me that even then there are quite a few vertices that need to get welded. So these are actually on top of each other, and it's going to OK this. So any vertices that were not connected together, they're welded now. A reason could be that I didn't connect them properly in GravitySketch, and GravitySketch will only weld vertices. It will not look at a threshold, but it will actually only weld them if they're on exactly the same spot. So if they're a very small space apart, it will not weld them. At least that's what I know about it at the moment. Okay, we've welded the vertices. This is important because if you start UV unwrapping, you will see in your unwrap maps when certain vertices have not been welded. But we won't need to deal with that because we fixed it for now. Okay, so I'm gonna add a unwrap UVW modifier. Open the UV editor, which I usually have on a second screen, but because I'm capturing, I'll move it around a bit to make it visible. I go into edge selection and I pretty much use the edge flow of the objects to create the light map seams. Now you want to create as little light map seams as possible, and where possible, create them in spaces where they're a little harder to see. But there will always be moments where, for example, with this tree, I cannot escape the fact that I will have to create a long vertical light seam along the trunk here. It's going to be hard otherwise to unwrap this piece of geometry properly. So I'll create these, select these edges, do multi-select with holding in Control, select these edges like this. I'll select the cross section just below these branches. I could make some branches part of this UV unwrap, but I think I'm just gonna unwrap the trunk and then do the branches in kind of a similar way. So make sure you go all the way around, and with these edges selected, I go to this button, which is Convert Edge Selection to Seams. I click it and they turn blue. These will be your light seams. Now I go into polygon mode in my Unwrap UVW modifier, select the polygon, then go to this button, expand polygon selection to seams. It will expand the selection and stop where you've created the seams. Now if you by accident forgot one of these edges, your whole object will turn red, and you know you messed up and you need to go in and close it all off. That's pretty straightforward. Now this all is selected. Then you go to this little animal hide looking button here. It's called the pelt map. You click that. And now this is the button where if I had kept these as individual objects, but still sharing the same Unwrap UVW modifier, it would have crashed right now. So this is why we're going to detach him at the end. I'm going to hit Start Belt, and there it unwrapped the trunk for me. But now the UVs are stretching quite a bit, and that's why we have this button. And this button, the Start Relax button, tries to bring it back into a shape that's a little closer to the original 3D object. We can commit this, and we've created our first UV island, I think it's called. I can select element to make sure I select that whole thing, and just move it out of the way. And then basically I do the same for all these branches. Let me first do one of these spheres. Now here I might want to select an edge that might be a little less visible. I'm selecting them manually and adding in selection by holding down Control. What I can also do for this particular shape is select these three and then hit this loop button, and it will loop until it branches off. And I think these three as a light map seam will be enough to unwrap this whole shape. So let's see if I'm correct. Hit the convert edge selection to seam. They turn blue. Polygon mode, select a polygon, expand that selection. And now this is what we want. We wanted to select the entire sphere. Go to the pelt map button, start pelt. And it's looking a little weird, so let's see what happens when we hit the start relax button. Yes. So that's kind of untangled those vertices in the middle. There will be some stretching with this, but because I know that I'm not gonna be using very complicated textures on these shapes, this is okay for me. And I like the fact that it's just one little UV island for this one shape. Now I'm just going to go in and do different parts. I'm not going to bore you with unwrapping the whole thing. I might speed that up at the end of the video. Okay, so we're going forward with the second object. Just kind of a plant. I'm going to do one of these leaves here. Now something that I've noticed is in the tip of this object, it's kind of a funky geometry. There's two quads and two on the bottom that are kind of stretched. And I already know that's not going to unwrap properly. Normally what I would want to do is just select just this edge from the side. Oops. And if I had fixed that tip correctly, that would have been enough. And I would not have created, I would not have needed to create a light map seam on the other side. So it would just have unwrapped in one UV island, which is what I want. That's not going to work now. Now there are two things that I can do. One thing is I might want to try to still keep it one UV island. I'll go around the tip just a little, convert them to light map seams, go into polygon, expand, the whole object turns red, which is what we want. Then hit the pelt map. Now it looks like it's pelting okay, but as soon as we're gonna hit the start relax button, it's gonna try to turn these stretched UVs into something that is more similar to the actual object. And there we're gonna run into some problems because these tips are not really, they're gonna continue to struggle. Now we can go in, if we would want to, we can go in and commit and go into vertex mode, select these, oops, make sure your element is unselected. Select these vertices and move them up, spread these around and, you know, make them fit. But it's kind of a lot of work. And because I know that this shape is not going to have very complex textures, and not going to have like little dots or little shapes where you're going to really see the UV stretching. It's just going to be basically one color with a soft gradient. Then it doesn't really matter that these UVs are a little stretched. So what I would prefer to do here is just go back to expand polygon selection to seams, hit the pelt map, and just leave it like that. Not hit the start relax button. For the purposes of this shape, this UV map, although not totally proper, but it's gonna work. And you know, you got to think a little practical. And also I'm a bit lazy, but don't tell anybody. A different way we could do it, let me just show you, is create two different UV islands. So I'll just take another leaf and select one edge, hit the loop, and it's going to go all the way around. Convert it to seams, and now we just pelt these sides one by one. And I didn't expect this, but now even still the point is a little messed up. Well, in this case, we're just going to do it the way I did it before. Now, let's say, this might be a good thing to show you as well. I want to undo some light map seams here. I have a little problem focusing because it's one big object. I'll just go into Edit Seams, the little button with the pencil here. And then as I hold down Alt, I click these edges and they're not light seams anymore. And like before, I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to give it a little, let it go a little past that point. Make sure you undo these seams. This is also a way, if you keep this selected, you can immediately turn edges into light map seams if you just click them. But I really love to do the edge selection first and then convert the whole selection into a seam, because as I'm selecting, I'm kind of figuring out what's gonna work for unwrapping and what's not gonna work. So I select it, expand that selection again, and the same as the other one, just do the pelt map and leave it like this, not do the relax. And of course it's going to be like a similar shape to this. Now let me unwrap this middle part. The top is kind of like a little sphere. So there, I probably just want to have these edges selected and oh, whoops. Hold down Control to multi-select. Now, as I have these selected, I can just hit the loop button because I know these edges are not going to loop. I'm not totally sure, but I think I can just hit the loop button now, and yeah, it's just going to loop down. And I think that this will be all I need. Let's convert them to light map seams. Pelt. And let's see if we run into trouble here. Yeah, it seems to be a little tight around the neck. Well, what do I want to do here? Let's go in and just to show you how that works, I'm just going to fix these vertices, because I do think I want to give this little ball at the top a different material, and the less my UV stretch, the more predictable my results will be. I just go in and make sure I select only those vertices and then move them up. Kind of lay them out in a more or less logical way. And then you just kind of spread these out. Now you got to remember that there's always going to be some UV stretching. It is actually kind of impossible to take a 3D shape and perfectly unfold it in two-dimensional space. This is why you, for example, a map of the globe, there are all these different ways of projecting that 3D shape into a 2D map. In some, Antarctica looks way bigger, for example, than in others. This is just because you have to make some choices. So it's good to keep in mind what the purpose of this model is and what you're planning on doing with it and when creating materials. Of course, when you want realism and you want lots of details, you're going to have to spend a lot of time making sure it's as perfect as possible. Okay, this should work. Now sometimes, because now I've kind of given a suggestion as how I would want this to be laid out. What I sometimes try to do then is, oops, that's just not good. I'm gonna try to relax it. Sometimes it works, but it doesn't now. So, okay, let's leave it like this. Now these other leaves I would do in the similar way that I've done these. And now I move ahead to this shape. Also not a very easy shape because it's organic, doesn't have any hard edges, doesn't have any likely candidates for light map seams. And it's kind of hard to do it in your mind. So I'm just going to go in and, whoops, why did I undo that? Just going to go in and kind of go around and make a selection that I think is unwrappable. Just going to create a seam here on the outside. Again, if this was to be a very realistic material, then you would want to avoid this, because if you have like some tiling textures you're using a substance painter, very possible they're not going to align when they're crossing this light map seam. But for the purposes of this model, I'm not going to make it too complicated. So let's go up. Try to go around corners as little as possible, because that's bound to get you into trouble when trying to relax those UVs. Okay, maybe something like this. Let's see how that works. Now the palette map, as expected, is going to go fine. And Well, the relax is also looking fine. Oh, I don't understand why it undoes my complete selection. So UV unwrapping is not the most inspiring part of creating assets for VR, but it is very important. It's a very important skill to have, especially because you need to do light baking. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, but the UVs that I'm using for these materials are also going to be the UVs I'm going to use for light mapping. Unity gives you the possibility to create automatic light map UVs, but they can produce undesired results, and they're just automatic UV unwrapping. And at least when you use your material UVs, there still might be some issues, but you can detect them very quickly because you've made those UVs and you know where problems can arise. Now I've kind of randomly created a whole seam there, and I need to close it off at the bottom. And I'm thinking that I am going to accept some stretching again with this. Whoops, that's annoying. Try to use that loop button where you can. Sometimes you go into wireframe mode just to be able to see the edges. I'll just go up here. Oh, I've accidentally selected an unwanted edge. That just click, hold Alt, and I should be able to deselect it. Why isn't it working? Well, I just needed to look past the polygon. And I'm just going to close it off like this. Now this is going to be a fairly large one, so I'm not sure if it's going to work, but sure. Let's take it. The top part, there we go. And now hopefully the bottom will be doable as a whole as well. And that's fine. Good enough. So that's the, let's call it the leafy part. So the trunk part of this we're still going to have to create a seam down the middle. So I think I'll do this the same way I did the tree, which means take that edge selection, that vertical edge selection down the trunk. And select all the way around here. Now I didn't show this with the tree, so I'll do that here. I'll just go forward now and do one of these branches, and then unfold those pieces. So just go around the branch, and then I'll select the seam least visible. Make sure it really ends there. Okay. I'll do the trunk. Start belt and relax. And do the same with the branch. And process this bush the same way. Now for a shape like this, I would also go in and basically do it the same way. Just do these branches separately. Select the least visible edge. Now actually for this it might be better to select that corner edge. And let's see what happens if I hit the loop. Yeah, it kind of stops where I want it to stop. Right there until it branches off. Let me convert these to seams already. Do this part again. Now hopefully I can do this whole branch in one piece. And here you basically use the same workflow for all these branches. Then you'll have the trunk, and this might be a good thing to show you as well. So let me just close off these branches with seams. Whoops. It undoes my entire selection if I hit Ctrl Z. I keep forgetting that. Okay. Now let's also close this part off. Now what we're gonna end up with, because now I want to do the main branch of this plant. So let me first do that top part where I select these three, then hit loop. It's not going to go all the way down because it's going to stop here, of course. Convert these to light map seams. Now we're going to end up with holes. And holes are usually also a little weird when you hit that relax button. So in this case, it's very good to have that light map seam connect to that hole. so it can get a little space here. Now it's going to connect to this hole we're going to leave here, and it's going to connect to a hole. It'll be obvious in a moment what I mean with that. But there are still going to be some holes on the other side that are going to be open. Now let's see if they give us problems. Convert these to light map seams. Expanded selection. Now let's see what happens. Now here though are those two holes I was talking about, because that vertical light map seam isn't connected to these holes on the other side. Sometimes this gives you problems when you hit the start relax button, but in this case, no, it seems to be fine. If it would have given us an issue, because there would have been some UV tension that it couldn't solve, I would just make a little cut to the outside here and here. But we don't really have to do this now. So I'm going to leave this for now. So this would be the main branch, and I keep moving it out of the UV space because the pelt map is going to automatically map it inside of this space. So you would do all these branches in a similar way. I'm just going to move on to the next shape. This is a rock, and would basically just unwrap it like I did the sphere. Now I want to use these rocks, get a lot of mileage out of them, so I'll use them upside down and scale them, and so there's not really an ideal way to put the light map seams. For now, I do think that this would be like the flat side would most likely be the bottom side, especially if for the larger versions. So I don't know if it's logical, but I'm gonna put the light map seams on the bottom. Just select these three, hit loop. It's gonna just like those spheres we had at the tree at the beginning. It's going to extend to those edges until it branches off. And just the same thing, expand selection, and it should give us a nice pelt, or at least when we hit the relax. And obviously, yeah, this is going to be pretty heavy stretching. Maybe in this case, we want to have some kind of pattern on the rocks, and we're like, yeah, this is going to stretch just a little too much. How can we give it a little bit more space? Well, one of the things you could do, just create some extra cuts. Maybe we'll just add this. I'm trying to imagine in my mind what that looks like. But I'm not Stephen Hawking, so let's just try it. Now, just created like an extra flap there, which means less stretching. Let's do it on the other side as well. Let's add this one. I'm going to leave it like this. And I would do it the same way for this one. What I could do is just select these. And hit the loop button. now it's going to detach this. I don't want that, so I'm gonna unselect those edges. Let's see what happens now. This kind of gives you the classical way you would unfold a box. Which in a way it is. So yeah, just to show you the ways you could do that. Now we're going to end up with these smaller shapes, the small flowers. Which is going to be kind of a lot of work, but we do need to do it. Now I could go all the way around, create 2 UV islands, but I'm going to try to keep it one shape. But I need to go around the edge a little bit because there's going to be some tension there. Maybe this will be enough. Let's try it. And I think that works nicely. Do it the same way for all these leaves. Now let's see how we're gonna do this middle part. This might be a good place to add a light map seam in an area where we are not very likely to see it. So they're like in between the little leaves. Loop it around. Go to wireframe mode to see it actually looping. Yes. Convert it to seams. Now if we select this whole shape, it's going to give us a proper shape. There's going to be some stretching here, but as I mentioned before, this is just going to be one color, maybe a different color on this little nipple. So I think this is fine. Do that backside as a one part as well. And of course, a trunk like this. Now I see I should have actually deleted these top faces. I didn't, so we might get into that same little problem. So the problem where we create some tension and it can't solve it. It can't solve the pelt map, so I'm gonna select that vertical edge and make some extra cuts here. So hopefully that will resolve itself. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah, that's good enough. We don't really need this part, but I forgot to delete it in the mesh, and it's kind of hard to go back once you've already started UV mapping. This is why it's so important to check your mesh properly before you start. But, you know. Okay. Now for this, let's just select one of these edges and create a complete loop. Now, this might be a part we could unwrap in this, like completely like this. And actually I'm gonna try it. Still, we're gonna have a little stretching here at the top part, but it's a small little flower, so it's not really a problem. And there you have it. Now the bottom part, let's see if we can do it as one whole UV island. I keep calling them UV islands. Maybe the term is shell, actually, but you know what I mean. I'm thinking that this should be enough. And it would be, if it weren't for these leaves starting to overlap one another. So how could I get rid of that? Gonna undo that, and I'm going to go in and make a selection here. So I'll do the trunk as a separate UV island. It worked for the top part, so it should work for the bottom part. And it's not overlapping, so yeah, that'll be fine. Then just for the trunk, we still need to create that vertical edge selection. And now I think I made a little error, because I probably forgot I already had a light map seams going on. So they were still here. So now I have the complete part. No, actually I don't. I want to fix that. Whoops. So now it turned green, and now I can't really see if I'm deselecting it. Not really sure what's going on there. But I basically do the same thing. Edit seams, and then hold Alt, click them. So what we should see is that selection taking over that entire trunk, and now it is, so we should have the entire shape here. And yes, we've selected that whole trunk. I'm moving it to the side. Now we have these small little mushrooms. Now these have little edges where it does make sense to select those to create a loop. And I'm going to do the top part as a whole again. Start pelt, stop, relax, commit, move it to the side. Doesn't really matter where, because all these parts we're gonna pack them into the UV space later on. Now there's several ways we could go about the bottom part. And I'm always trying to think, how could I put them in one UV space? Just kind of curious what's going to happen if I just make this one vertical cut. But it does run into problems because yeah, it starts to overlap itself. So I don't want that. I'm gonna do it the same way I did with the trunks of the other plants, which means I'll just do the trunk part separately. So I'll select an edge here, loop it around. Then I'll do this part. Now that one, those light map seams here, the green ones, they're still there, but they're fine. As I'm hitting the relax button, you can see it's trying to bend it kind of back into the shape. But this is the bottom part of a mushroom, which not a lot of people are gonna see, so I think this is fine. Now I'll do the trunk. Start pelt, stop relax. And this is pretty much what we would have expected. Let me move these parts to the side. As I said, I'm not gonna go through all these shapes. I'm gonna show you like the basic kind of things that I would do to solve these shapes. This mushroom you would just do the same way you did this other one. Now here's kind of the last object of the bunch. It's kind of a ground cover material, and I think for this, I'm just thinking if there's a way we could unwrap the whole thing. I think again we're gonna do a loop here at the top of the, let's call it the trunk. I don't know what the word would be. And maybe we can actually have this top part be one UV shell if we select these edges but don't go all the way around, and maybe stop here. And I'll show you what that looks like. And it just leaves you with a hole here, of course, where that little a stem, I think you would call it, goes into it. Whoops, it's kind of hard staying focused on that right object. Let me just do this vertical light map seam for that stem on the inside. Again, the less visible it is, the better. And expand that selection, palette map it, and it leaves us with this. Then just go in and do these other ones in the same way. So it is kind of a lot of work, but it's an important skill to have if you want to make assets for VR. And if you want to use Substance Painter in your workflow, you're gonna need to get into doing custom UVs. The new Substance Painter does have some good automatic UV unwrapping, which I've used with varying success. For organic shapes, it's very good, but it doesn't always produce the results you want, so it's good to be able to do it yourself. I'm gonna go in and unwrap all these other parts, and then I'm gonna go back and show you what we're gonna do with all these UV shells or UV islands we've created, and how to pack them into one UV map. And after that, it's finally time to get into a little more fun part, which is the Substance Painter part. Okay, so now we've unwrapped all the parts in the scene. I'm gonna open my UV editor. And this leaves me with all the parts scattered around, and I was consistently moving every part that I had unwrapped outside of the UV space. The reason I did that, because then I can easily select everything within this space and see if I missed anything. Because everything that wasn't unwrapped would be somewhere within this space, probably like super small in that corner. But as you can see, nothing is red, nothing is selected, so I've effectively unwrapped all the parts. Now what I need to do is pack these UVs. So I do Ctrl A, select them all, go to Tools, Pack UVs, and here's the Rescale Clusters, which is going to rescale them with the appropriate size with regards to how big they are in this scene. That's why it's important that these scenes have the appropriate scale with regards to one another, because that's going to define how much texture space they're going to use. For now, I'm also going to turn on rotate clusters and fill holes, because the actual direction of the UV map is not that important to me. It would be important if you're going to texture something like wooden planks, then it's very useful to have them all in the same direction. But for this, it's not that important. So I'm going to turn on that rotate clusters and also fill holes, because sometimes you have like big holes and they can put 3ds Max can pack UV islands in those holes. It's not going to happen in this case because we only have very small holes, but those are two options you can play around with. The rest of the settings are fine. We hit OK. All the UVs are now packed into the space, and this is fine. But there's still something we have to do, because it's still one object. I'm going to add a edit poly to the stack, and I'm just going to select the different elements. It's very important not to mess around with your polys at this stage, because that's going to break your UV map. But if you just do this, just select a bunch and then detach, and then do that for every object you want detached, then it's still going to preserve those UVs. Now for this, because I want to have these leaves separate, I'm going to detach them all. And for the tree, we can decide, actually I'm going to detach these also separately. This way we can use some of these spheres and duplicate them. Maybe some have fallen to the ground. There is going to be some ambient occlusion once we put it through Substance Painter at the bottom, but that might actually be a good thing. That will just be the side we use to put it on the ground. Okay, now we've detached all these parts. This object we have now is actually an empty object. Doesn't really hold any information. I'm not sure if it's okay for me to delete it. I'm gonna do Control I, invert selection, and then I select all the objects. 21 objects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, checks out. And now we just need to go to Hierarchy, Effect Pivot Only, Center to Object. Now all the pivots are centered to the objects, which makes it much easier to move them around after we've imported them in Unity. Now I've selected all these objects, and you export this in total as, go to Export Selected, and export this as an FBX. I'll call this the Flora tutorial stuff. Now this part is done, and now we're going to open it up in Substance Painter. We're going to put some materials on it.